Thank you, Yara. And now, the third opposition speaker, David.
France is richer than Ghana. But what they fail to understand, and what they've ignored throughout the entire debate, is that in their policy, when you let millions of refugees flock to France from Ghana, one day France will become like Ghana. And this is a situation which they have repeatedly ignored, which they address all down the line. It's a situation of the real world which they refuse to exist in. So let's quickly look at today's debate evaluatively. Let's look at the yardstick we gave them. We asked them to prove why a moral duty would exist, even if it harms both the developed and the developing world. We think they've largely ignored the effects on the developed world, and in fact, ignored our responses on how it harms the developing world. Let's basically look at the principal clash and contradictions in this debate so far. We showed them that their principle, basically that the lives of immigrants will get better if they go to the developed world, would only be true if their lives do in fact get better. We've given you countless arguments why they won't. What did they say? Their lives will get better. Their lives will get better. They never told us how or why. So, let's look what they didn't deal with. We gave you a point on sovereignty. Basically, that we believe that it makes logical sense that if a government is elected by the people, their first and primary responsibility is to the people who elected them in the first place. They ignored this point and said that's quite unfair. We say it may be unfair, but that's how the real world works. Obviously something they don't want to deal with. We talked to you about the idea of remittances. And I'll address this very shortly because they gave us a very weird reply to this. But on the other stuff they deal with, they see the idea of a brain drain and a labor drain, where in fact considered in their stance that in their situation, your brain drain, your labor drain is worse. Because now everybody can move over, as opposed to in our system, where as mentioned in the status quo, we obviously have certain limits on how many people can move over every year. So look at the three big issues of today's debate. First of all, who truly has the moral duty? Second of all, who best upholds morality? And last of all, what are the effects of both sides' policies on the developing world? Which we understand is who we really want to deal with in today's debate. So, to them really, immigrants, their lives will always get better if they move to the developing world. Then they told us that they want to talk about principle. So we said, fine, let's talk about principle. We showed you how their simple logic of saying that immigrants' lives will get better if they move to the developing world has been disproven countless times on our sides. We've talked about how you simply move problems from the developing world to the developed world. We've talked about overpopulation, about the kind of crime rates that escalate when you have unemployment, by the fact that if 1 million refugees or immigrants move to New York, which only has jobs for a few hundred of them, what happens to the rest of your refugees? We say they become homeless, they become unemployed, they become starving. The very conditions which they fled in their situation. No, thank you, madam. So, in this regard on principle, we've also told you that in order truly for their principle to stand, they have to prove the practicality of why their lives will get better. We've told you this in Joshua repeatedly. They still failed to clash with us in this regard. We don't think they're doing their job as a proposition. Yes, madam.
If their lives are so much worse, why do we see Mexican immigrants immigrating to the United States constantly, more and more, and never returning back because they have had the worst?
Madam, we've told you right at the start about the idea of the American dream. You seem to think that your immigrants, that your poor, uneducated, starving homeless man in Ghana has a very brilliant idea of the kind of economic situation in France. What kind of jobs are waiting for him? To him, he just thinks France is rich, the people in France are rich. If I go there, I will be rich as well. But we see that the truth of the situation is that when they do go there, they end up in ghettos, they face discrimination, they find it very hard to return even if they wanted to. So we see that while you seem to believe that your refugees are very, very well educated and very well informed, we tell you the truth of the situation, sadly, they're not. So, do we have a moral duty? And they really only had one point on this. The idea that because some countries were colonized, we therefore need to pay some form of restitution back. But we told you that it's not true that this was a one-way exchange. The fact that Team Singapore is here debating with you in English is a sign that the colonial masters clearly did give us some benefits. Like, for example, setting up English language schools, like providing our political leaders with education in Cambridge and Oxford. So clearly, it wasn't a one-way thing. We think they have a very shallow understanding of how these things work. But we say, even if it's true that, say, the British plundered India, we say that even if that was true, we think that they've more than repaid their debt. We've talked to you about the idea of investment. We say that although we don't support it, international aid is in fact a symbol that at least countries are trying to repay their debt. So we say that if you have all these different ways to repay your debt, why do you have to open your borders when it's showing you the multitude of harms that will happen in their situation? Once again, no response. We say that in fact on the third tier, it's worse in your case, because now you engender a mentality of blame. That now Robert Mugabe from the Zimbabwe can say that everything that's wrong with Zimbabwe is because of the West, because of colonial masters. We say that this removes any impetus that any developing country would have to develop, to grow. We say their case traps developing countries in a cycle of blame and of poverty. So, the second idea, who best upholds morality? And we tell you, we both want to help the people. So, truly, who does this better? We say that in their situation, you move all the problems of the developing world over to the developed world. Overpopulation, more people than jobs, crime rates. They move the problems from Nairobi to New York without actually solving them. So, we see that in our situation, how do we help? We've talked about foreign investment into local companies in the developing world. This is how you overcome your European Union restrictions on Ivory Coast producers, by empowering these companies to now have the ability to pay higher wages to their local workers, not have the attempt to break into the global economy. We see this is the best way by making sure that the developing world is now on par with the developed world, rather than moving the population from one side to the other without actually dealing with any of the problems which they claim exist in our situation. So we say that it's quite ironic that they claim to stand for human rights and morality, when in fact they ignore both. So, let's look at the last and final idea on, do we help the developing world? And they've basically given us two responses here, or rather two issues of clash. One, on the idea of investment, and secondly, on the idea of remittances. So let's deconstruct both methodologies. First, on the idea of investment. We've told you that they're mischaracterizing us when they say that this investment goes to MNCs to exploit your people. We say that's ridiculous. MNCs don't need investment from foreign people. They get enough from their own country. We say we're investing in local companies, where the African Union itself declared this very year that investment is one of the most important things that the African continent can get in order to become a true global player, something which you clearly seem to ignore. We've told you about how in this situation, you don't empower the developing world, because now they have the ability and the resources to break out and become developed, which is clearly something both sides want. Yes, sir.
You actually think that it is right to make these countries dependent on few corporations that provide them poor jobs for $2 or $1 a day or month, whatever?
Sir, you've ignored the fact that we're talking about local companies here. And the simple fact is that even if it's true that we talk about MNCs, what happens in your situation? They now go to the developed world, where they're still dependent on these corporations who exploit them for even less. Because in your situation, the government has no interest to protect your immigrants, they have no interest in protecting their wages. So in our situation, it's still much better. I'd rather live in our world. We've talked about the idea of infrastructure development, where Botswana, because of Shell coming in and building ports, can now become the largest rare earth mineral exporter apart from China. All these things they seem to ignore. So, on to the last issue of remittances. What have they said? I go to the developed world, I become clever, I come back, I bring back money. But we told you that this won't happen. In Ghee, we talked about how in your policy, where everyone can go over, why would I leave anyone behind? Because as you mentioned, conditions in Ghana are terrible. I have no water, I'm being attacked every day. Why don't I just go and live in France? They said, maybe you have traditional or historical boundaries keeping you back. But we say in the era of globalization, this is a very inadequate response. We see mass migration happening on a very large scale. We see that their case exacerbates this problem. Their case keeps the developing world at the bottom of the ladder. They believe that the developing world will never improve. We say we can help them do so.